Hi everyone, and welcome to this discussion on how can a purpose-led business be held accountable. I'm Untitled-DICKIE, the founder of Meaningful Business, and we're looking forward to hosting you today. There's been much conversation around the rise of purpose-led businesses in recent years, and it's a very welcome trend, but there's been much less conversation around how they can hold themselves to account. So across two sessions today, we're going to be considering how leaders of early stage impact startups and large corporates can move beyond rhetoric and make sure they're living up to their impact claims. We're delighted to be joined by a range of amazing entrepreneurs, business leaders and board members. And for this first session, our moderator is Libby Chambers, a CMO and the board director of TSB Bank alongside other financial institutions. And she'll be joined by Amit Gudka, the founder of Field, Liam Black, who's a board member of Togetherall and a serial social entrepreneur, and Michelle Cirocco, who is the Chief Social Responsibility Officer of Televerde over in the US. We invite all our audience to ask questions using the chat function throughout, and we'll try to incorporate as many of them as we can. But aside from that, I'm delighted to hand over to Libby to kick off the first session. So over to you, Libby.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks for everybody who's dialed in. I understand we have people joining today's meeting from over 30 countries, which is really fantastic. I think close to 200 people almost. So it's really going to be a great session. I want to quickly move into introducing our panelists. And I've asked each of them not to read out a big long biography, because I think you can find that on the Meaningful Business website or on their LinkedIn profiles. But I did ask them to spend maybe a minute telling you about themselves, what they're passionate about, the business or the social impact venture that they're leading right now. And so without further ado, let me firstly introduce Liam Black.
Oh, hello everyone. Greetings from the west coast of Ireland, where I'm on holiday at the moment, but delighted to break it to join in this conversation. I've been involved in sort of social entrepreneurship and impact investing for a number of years now. And I'm really interested in how entrepreneurs who want to change the world are connected with capital and how they make sense of the work that they're doing. I'm involved in an impact fund called Impact Ventures UK, which is a pioneering fund based in the UK, 10-year capital growth fund that backs entrepreneurs who want to change the world. I'm also on the board of Togetherall, a purpose-driven mental health business digital platform that enables tens of thousands of people to connect with one another and support each other. And I'm also the exec chairman of a company called The Conduit, based in London, which is a global network of thousands of entrepreneurs and investors. And part of our family is an impact fund called Conduit Capital. So all this stuff about accountability and how we know we're doing what we say we're doing and how our investors and customers know it and believe it is something I'm very passionate about, and I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Liam. Let me bring in Amit Gudka. Amit?
Hi, Libby. Thanks. Yeah, good to be here too. Sadly, I'm not on holiday, unlike Liam. My background, so started out my career as an electricity and gas trader. I did that for nearly 9 years. So in the city, left there in 2014 to set up an energy supplier called Bulb, which has grown significantly in the UK and has international operations now as well, and a very large team. Left there at the end of last year to set up my new venture, Field. And yeah, what we're doing is building the renewable energy infrastructure that we need to make the renewable transition happen over the next 20 to 30 years, starting with battery storage in the UK. So, creating a way for us to store the renewable energy that's produced and use it when we need it. And yeah, I guess, the thing that, I'm passionate about is the renewable transition and energy, and, how do we move from this world of, fossil fuel energy to renewables. It's the big challenge of our time, and also a huge opportunity, a huge amount to learn, a huge amount to do. So that's the thing that gets me excited and you know, up for doing this every day.
Thank you. And last but not least, let me bring in Michelle Cirocco, who's joining us from the West Coast of the US. So it's very early in the morning there, so I'm impressed. Michelle.
Thank you very much. It is early, but I'm happy to be here with all of you. So I am the Chief Social Responsibility Officer for a company called Televerde, which is a business-to-business sales and marketing agency that provides services for some of the biggest and brightest technology companies in the world, companies like SAP, Adobe, GE, Philips, but we do that with a really unique business model. We were founded 26 years ago based on the idea that providing women in prison with jobs and training and education while they were incarcerated, that we could build a profitable business while providing them with the opportunity to develop the marketable skills necessary to transition back into the community and become financially, not just financially independent, but financially successful and build, you know, meaningful and rewarding careers in the tech industry. And so we have been, like I said, doing this for 25 years, long before the idea of social enterprise and purpose in business. It was just a passion project, and have grown to where we have 70% of our workforce is currently incarcerated women, and 30% of the remaining workforce is women who started their career with their company while they were incarcerated. We have people, every department, every level of the organization, including 30% of our leadership team that started their career while they were with the company while they were in prison. And I'm really excited, you know, this year that we were able to expand our business model from the US to just opening up a location at Her Majesty's Prison in just outside of Manchester, England. And so it's a business model that's really shown great success, where the women have very low recidivism rates, high unemployment rates, and are able to earn salaries that are 4 times the national average for a formerly incarcerated individual.
Thank you. I mean, I think you can see that Meaningful Business has pulled together a really diverse group today. So let's just jump right in. I wanted to, maybe I'll start with Michelle and we'll work our way back around the panel. I wanted to hear from you a business that you feel has really excelled in terms of defining a compelling purpose, and then also communicating it powerfully to all of its stakeholders, whether those are customers, employees, investors, et cetera. So I think this will ground the audience in sort of what we all mean by purpose before we then go on to start talking about accountability. So Michelle?
Well, if I could be so indulgent and actually talk about Televerde, and the reason why I'd like to do that is I just explained to you the who we are and what we do, but and what the purpose of our business is. But as an organization, we did not lead with purpose. So I've been with the company 22 years. I started there while I was, you know, serving a prison sentence, and through my journey in growing the company, we always kept our story private. It was almost like a dirty little secret what we were doing, for fear of what people would think about us. And it wasn't until probably, well, we dabbled in sharing the story publicly a few times, 2009, 2010, but still a lot of fear. So it wasn't until about 2016, 17, 18 that we really came out of the closet and had to, and in doing so, had to come up with the message and the story of what the purpose was and why we were doing it, and develop or deliver or share the facts and the impact of what we were doing. And so it's through the storytelling and telling that the impact that it's had, the company has really been able to grow and understand and share more about purpose. And it's organizations like Meaningful Business that have given the platform for us to be able to do things like this. That's great.
Liam?
Well, I'm going to pick a company that's part of the portfolio that Impact Ventures UK invests in. And it's a business called Elvie, E-L-V-I-E, which was created by an amazing entrepreneur called Tanya Bola. And its purpose is to get state-of-the-art technology to breastfeeding women. And what I really love about it is it has no wordiness. It's identified this purpose, a very underserved market, with the aim of bringing sort of modern technology into what is sort of bringing it out of the Middle Ages. And it does it without any wordiness. It does it with great technology. It does it with a voice and a narrative, which is very engaging, manages to be very cool without being sort of pretentious. And the clarity of its purpose has attracted to it not only investors, so it's grown very, very quickly and its valuation is rising, but also I know that it attracts really brilliant staff. I know some of them because they are drawn by the clarity of the purpose and how that is at the center of the business model. So I would say LV, everyone listening should check it out, elvie.com. And I think it's a really great current example of bringing together entrepreneurship, purpose, great technology, and a brilliant way of telling the story.
Thank you. And then Amit.
I mean, yeah, one that really, again, it's in a different space to I guess some of the other examples and also what we do. But there's a company called All Plants. They, it's frozen meals that are all plants, so they're completely vegan. And it's been really different. That is the company, but that's what they stand for, right? Is this shift to this shift to all plant food, and the impact that has on the world, but actually in a product that's actually very, very user friendly. You order these meals, they come in a box that you have to send back for recycling. It's a really well done business, really tasty. So very practical, and we have just increased the amount of vegan food that we eat at home. But really, like, driven behind that, the founder JP, is really mission driven. He really speaks really well about vegetarianism, about vegan and the impact of meat. And I just think it's been so effective the way that he's communicated it really comes in. So you're getting something that's really helpful and practical and tasty, but you really feel part of that movement when you do it. And I think it's really powerful.
I think some of the themes that are already coming out are consistency, from the top to the bottom across the board, both in terms of communications, but also in terms of staying true to the purpose when you're thinking through product and you're thinking through channel. And so already I think some of those themes are developing. I wanted to shift now and ask, I think hopefully the viewers have seen kind of examples across a wide spectrum of what we mean by purpose. And I think everybody can think for themselves about businesses that they've come across or charitable organizations, whatever it might be, that embody that in your own lives. But I wanted to ask you guys, why do you think this whole purpose topic has been climbing the agenda for leaders, particularly over the last 2 or 3 years? And I think just reflect back on your own, circles of business and work where you travel and think about what's been going on there. Amit, you want to speak about that? Just why is this suddenly kind of on the top conversation list?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's so where we are, what we're doing with Field. I think purpose. I mean, you call it purpose, but it's just like the most important. It's the most important thing, right? That we need to. I think that needs to be solved over the next. Or attempted to be solved over the next 30 years is climate change. And it's so important that almost like that just being a part of your business that you're trying to almost lever in. It's different to that. This is it's central to our lives. It's central to society, and I think therefore. Yeah, it's so I think the overall purpose of the business is incredibly important. And but if you're launching a business and I guess thinking through, climate has to be part of that. I think it has to be a consideration in whatever business you launch now, whatever field it is. it's because climate is going to be such a big impact and consequence of what you do. In terms of what it does, like practically, we're not a consumer facing business. We are we're going to be building things like battery storage or renewable generation, and but for things like hiring, there's a lot of talk that the job market is tight at the moment. It's hard to hire people, but we've had such amazing inbound talent that's come to us for this because they want to be part of something.
Liam, what would you add to that?
I would just say on the so I'm involved in on the boards of a couple of businesses, and I try and speak to every new hire. And both businesses are growing so quickly. It used to be one-to-one. Now every month I'm talking to up to a dozen new hires, and I always ask people, why did you join us? This is really smart young talent in software engineering, marketing, sales, HR, across the whole piece. And to a man and a woman, they say, I want to work in a business that has a meaning beyond just profit maximization. One young woman who joined the mental health business said, look, if I have to sit in front of a screen all day, Liam, I want to make sure that has some meaning beyond just making the business successful. So I think that for us, we see the clear social purpose that we put at the heart of our businesses. These are the challenges in the world we are trying to address through our business model. Gives us a real competitive advantage to attract real talent, which makes us better businesses, which helps us grow, which helps us attract better talent, which then helps us attract new investment. Our last investor in one of the business isn't an impact investor. They're a pretty mainstream investor. But I think they were attracted by all of the above, that here is a business that has a very clear purpose in mind. And because of that purpose, it attracts great people, which makes the business better, which makes us a better investment. So I think trying to hold all of that together is the challenge of the board and for the exec, but that it gives us a competitive advantage in recruitment, and having different sorts of conversations with investors is absolutely our experience.
It's interesting. Early in my career, I was at McKinsey and I worked on this body of research and kind of thought leadership that we had called the War for Talent. And what the War for Talent talked about was how important talent was going to be as a competitive advantage for businesses over time. And I think talent is also incredibly relevant, whether you're a for-profit business or a university or whatever kind of organization you might have. But at the time, and this is now going back 20 years, we spend a lot of time talking about the employee value proposition. But in that context, 2 decades ago, it was mostly about what do you ask the employees to do, and then how are you going to reward them? And so it was much more of a concept of an exchange of value, and it had a very sort of monetary approach to it. And I think my own observation is what's happened is new types of value have come into the conversation. So it's not just about remuneration and your benefits package and how flexible it's going to be. It's about sources of value that have a higher order and arguably a more lasting impact in the life of that employee. And that's where I think the conversation is now getting to a much better place, and a place where businesses can really stand out, even if they can't afford to pay the most or the top of the scale.
I think all that stuff about how much you pay, all of that sort of stuff that you talk about there, that's kind of table stakes now, isn't it? That has to be a given. And in all the interviews not all of them, but most of the interviews that I'm involved in, and certainly when I meet new hires, the questions are around, do you really mean this, Liam? Do you really mean this? When the company talks about mission and purpose are the driver of what we do rather than an add-on, do you really mean it? And I think that you get into accountability, that being held accountable for those claims is important for all of the people who have an interest in the business. But there has been a shift in the last few years is undoubtedly, it has happened, undoubtedly.
Yeah. I mean, if I think about the word purpose, another way of framing it is to call it a promise, right? So you're making a promise to your employees, to your customers, to your shareholders, to a range of different audiences. And so it's how well are you going to be able to tell whether you keep your promises over time? And I wanted to ask Michelle, given that your employee population arguably has perhaps fewer options, at least in the beginning, and then grows through their career into having many more options as they, graduate from their situation. And how does that promise get communicated and then conveyed and measured over time for your employee population?
Yeah, it's interesting because, we do, even within the prison, you have to compete for talent because they do have options. And so, our promise to them is that we will invest in you and provide you with all of the tools and the resources and the training and support to basically find and fulfill your full potential. And then we provide them with examples of other women who have had a similar experience. So that's part of attracting the talent to come in and work for us. And that's really what our promise to them is that if you embrace what you're doing here while you're incarcerated, you will have an opportunity when you're released. And then what we've done in order to really make sure that we're fulfilling that promise is we developed and launched the Televerde Foundation. And the purpose of the Televerde Foundation is really to provide the women with all of the personal and professional development programs they need to successfully transition back into the community and to follow that path of career success. And so it's, because there's what you can do as a business, and then there's all the additional stuff that we can provide for them. And so it's giving them things like scholarships for, post-incarceration education and technical certifications, a peer mentor and a professional mentor, and career coaching, and just a whole series of educational opportunities that enable them to prepare for that transition home, as well as additional resources afterwards. And so then we track and measure on all of the things that are relevant to say, what is the post-release employment rate? What is post-release average salaries? What's the recidivism rate? How many people are taking advantage of scholarships, and how many people are getting college degrees and technical certifications? What is the progression of their compensation over time? So when they're first released, how much was their earning? What is it after 1 year? What is it after 3 years?
Progression.
Yeah, to demonstrate how this opportunity enables them to have more than just a good job when they get out, but to have a real career.
That's fascinating. I mean, that's in some ways one of the most extended promises you can imagine. I wanted to bring Amit in on the question of, we were talking at the very beginning about climate change being probably the most all-encompassing and perhaps longest range, both challenge, but also opportunity that all of us face wherever we live. When your purpose is something that is so universally shared, and in some ways, every single person is going to be affected by climate change, do you find that you personally have almost like a higher level of accountability given how many different stakeholders you actually will have over time? I wanted to just ask you as an entrepreneur how you're thinking about accountability in the energy renewable space where you are.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't necessarily say a higher level of accountability, but there's very clear things that we need to be very clear about, right? So firstly, I think to start with, what it's really important to just define, like, what's your mission, or what your metrics with this, and try and keep it simple. Yeah. And with ours, to start with, it is to start with, because we haven't set up our measurement, like the way that we're going to measure carbon emission equivalent, like carbon reduction equivalent. But we're starting with a number of megawatts of batteries that will get built. So a very simple metric. And that's what we talk about when we're going to hire people, and that's what we then discuss and look at as our key metrics. And so we're accountable to that quite simple metric internally. But then I think delving deeper, and this is the thing that we're going to do now and quite early on, is what's the real life cycle emissions impact of something like battery storage? Because there are impacts from it, right? From the mining of lithium,
Right.
to the mining of other products that involve, how ethical is the supply chain, etc. And those are things we're going to map out like right now, because you can quite easily get yourself into a position where you've you have this North Star metric that you're throwing everything at, and you haven't really taken the time early on to define what are some of the key things that impact that, and genuinely what is the positive impact of it. So that's a big project that we're working on now at an early stage. We're only a team of 7 people right now. We're going to spend decent chunk of time on that, like defining it right now. And I just think in the renewable space, it's so important to be really thought through of the overall impact. It's very easy to say, hooray, we're building this, we're building more renewable generation, and there can be unintended consequences from it, and you have to be really wary of that stuff. And so, yeah, important to sort of define that, really how you measure the impact of that from an early stage, and do that in-house. So that's something that we're spending quite a lot of time on.
It's interesting, both Michelle and Amit, what you've spoken about is having really clear, but also simple and not impossible to measure KPIs or metrics from the very beginning, which then inform, I suspect, the way in which you prioritize, and also help you navigate trade-offs. Because at the end of the day, we're always optimizing across a bunch of constraints, but also typically a number of different goals, all of which may not be met at the same time. But I think having clarity about all of that up front, it can make a big difference. Liam, you're involved in an organization that is focused on mental health and well-being. And by definition, in some ways, I suspect that's harder to measure. But can you talk about that from your perspective?
I think that if I could link it to your first question to Amit about accountability, I do think that if you put a social mission or a very well articulated purpose about changing the world at the front of your business, then the level of accountability that you set yourself up for is higher. If we just said, the business, we're just here to make money, and just you can judge us by how much money we make, that would be pretty straightforward, and that's how a lot of businesses go. Accounting. But we live in a world where you would never invest in a company if they didn't provide you with audited financial accounts. You would just regard it as absolutely madness. And yet there's a lot of claims going on in the world about social impact where there's no accounting at all. We have no framework to account for that, let alone the sort of externalities and the damage that business as usual is doing. And I feel as an investor and also chair of some businesses that are very sort of out there in terms of the claims we make about putting purpose first, that we do need to be held to account more. We do need to find ways of articulating, quantifying, and being held accountable for the claims that we make. And I think that this is across the whole business. We've talked about staff. Unless we can find ways of being objective data and reports and feedback on the impact we're having, all of our words mean nothing, and staff will become disillusioned and see us, will become cynical about that. A lot of investors, there's a lot of money flooding into the sort of impact world, and there's not enough, I don't think, of businesses being willing to be held accountable for the claims that are made. But I think if that money is to continue to grow, and we are really genuinely to see a change in the way in which business is done, this whole thing about accountability and articulating what the impacts are, how we measure them, and how we're held accountable for achieving them, and when we miss the mark, I think is going to become more and more important, which is why I'm so pleased that, Togetherall, the mental health business that has helped sponsor this, and I have the honor of being on the board of, sees this as such an important issue for us, and why we've created the Guardian Council as one way of holding ourselves accountable.
Can you tell us just a minute about that? Because I think it's an interesting model in an area that as I said earlier, is probably in some ways very hard to measure.
Yeah. So where the Guardian Council came from was very simple, which was, how can people trust us? Now obviously we have a lot of internal and very rigorous risk management processes and a fantastic team and a really great executive. But how are the members, that we have tens of thousands of people who use our platform, how are investors, how are our commissioning partners to believe us when we say that this is what we stand for and these are our impacts? And so one of the ways that we do that is we invited a group of well-known people in the mental health world across the public sector and the private sector and the non-profit sector to be guardians of that mission and to hold us to account. So it's a group of 5 amazing people here and in North America who meet regularly, who have access to all of the data of business to answer the question fundamentally, can you trust this company? When they say they're having this impact, where they say they have these risk management processes, when they say they have these approach to things, can you trust them? So it's a way of having external people who have access to all of the data to articulate the impacts that we're having and hold us to account if we fail.
In some ways, I think the heavy responsibility sits on the shoulders of entrepreneurs and leaders in this purpose-led space to actually educate all of their audiences about how they should be measured. But then it's kind of ironic, because as soon as you've educated people on how you want to be measured and how you should be measured, you kind of are setting yourself up to a quite high bar of then delivering it.
Very much so. Yeah. With big claims comes big responsibility.
Exactly.
So if Amit wants to, end, solve climate change, then it's a big,
for the impacts of it. Yeah.
And so, and I think the other sort of way around is, what are the unintended consequences of the models that we're developing? And for us, one of the ways, having a bunch of external experts interrogating and understanding and interrogating the business is a way for us to not only understand and be held accountable for the impacts we make, but also the any unintended consequences that there are of the model that we've adopted.
I know that all of you are in the space where you've had to raise capital. The unfortunate fact about life is some of what we're doing and most of what we're doing costs money. And during the early stages of any of these enterprises, I'm sure there's more investment than there is return in the immediate sense. Have you found the dialogue, and I'll open it up to the group. Have you found the dialogue with investors to be better or richer or more fact-based, more metrics-based over the last decade, say? And the reason I ask that is I'm wondering if all of the sort of, we hear a lot about shareholder expectations, and we hear a lot about, the new accounting standards that are going to cause everyone to have to report out on their impact in the ESG space. But does the investor dialogue feel different than it used to?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, you go.
Oh, so go ahead, Amit. You've been raising money very recently.
Yeah, I mean, I think in climate, in the climate space, I think there's such a big transition that needs to happen with such a huge amount of investment that needs to take place, that it's rather than it being for the sake of, all institutions are seeing just the financial returns potential there, and therefore it's becoming a place. There's just a huge shift into that space. So I think there's compared to even 5 years ago when we started looking at Bulb to now, there's been a massive shift, and I completely completely see that continuing. But we had to, and it's interesting, there's different types of investors, right? So more at the angel and kind of small family office, smaller VC level, there's a huge amount of there's a lot of people that want to invest in impact. There's a huge appetite for it there. I think large investors, so big name banks, huge targets for the amount that they're going to earmark for ESG financings over the next 2 or 3 decades. So like big shifts there, big teams in there. Probably a bit more in that my experience anyways, a bit more in that mid-size like PE level. That's where I think there's just a lot more focus on financial return and growth. So I think it's just interesting those how those different pockets are kind of shaking out right now, but definitely focus on climate is something that's massively shifted.
We've talked about, I think that there's an educational process that's going on in the financial community, right? About the fact that it's not just a volume of text and numbers and verbiage in your annual report, but it is more the things that can necessarily be communicated in a more simple way to customers, employees, et cetera. And so in some ways, the benefits of having to make it straightforward, I hope, are going to redound back to making many, many more investors have an appreciation for the impact that they can make by just making sensible allocation decisions in their capital. We haven't talked a lot about customers. And every business that we've just been describing has customers, whether it's participants in the power grid, or presumably you've got employers, Michelle, that you've had to convince about the capability and the value of investing in your employees. But wonder if you guys can just think about the customer side of things. And do you think customers are actually doing a better job of holding businesses accountable than they have been in the past? Any things that you see are powerful and working?
Well, I think that fundamentally it's all about the customer, right? So having purpose in your business is a meaningful competitive advantage. And as consumers, we vote with our dollars. And people think about that fundamentally at the consumer level as individuals in a B2B purchasing situation. But all of us are also individuals that's in a B2C situation, but all of us are also involved in businesses and making decisions for businesses based on what we know and what we hear about the business. And so I believe that, like I said, people vote with their dollars, and all things being equal, we're going to choose somebody who has a clear, defined purpose associated with their mission and is delivering on that purpose. And when organizations are claiming to do something, but then they are not delivering on it, or it starts to show that what they've said they're doing is not happening the way, we're going to take our money and we're going to vote elsewhere. And so that's really where the accountability comes is, you can't just claim purpose in your business and say I'm this and then not deliver, because people will see through that and they will, the internet, we have full access to all of the information, and we will take our choices elsewhere, and companies will suffer through the being able to employ people, as well as what their revenues are going to show.
Yeah, I think that's true whether you're a bank or an energy company or a retailer, whatever it might be, that people's ability to switch and people's propensity to switch, I think is one of the things that sort of gives all of this purpose stuff some actual substance. Because if you communicate all this stuff about what you're doing and then you don't do it, I know, all of us have young people in our midst who'll get up and switch phone providers tomorrow if they're not getting what they want, right? Liam, you were nodding earlier.
Well, I was going to say,
customers.
Yeah, absolutely. At the heart, I think it's true for any business and with their customers, at the heart of it is trust. Do you trust as a consumer or what we call our members? Do they trust us? Do they trust what we say? Do they trust the robustness of the products and services that we offer? And I think the key to the ongoing success of our business will be this willingness to publicly hold ourselves accountable through one of our ways with this guardian council, is a way of fortifying the trust that people can have in us, the users of our platform, as well as our investors and potential investors in the future. So I think this thing about being held to a board of directors being held to account for the claims that we make isn't just sort of, woo-woo, isn't it lovely if we did that. I think it's absolutely central to the enduring success of our businesses and the increases in valuation and being able to pay people and being able to have a successful business. So I think that I hope increasingly we will see as entrepreneurs and as business it becoming more mainstream, that great products and services, a huge amount of trust from your members or your users, customers, and the willingness of the high commands of these businesses to be held accountable for the claims that we make. I think it's all woven together, and the sort of journey that we're on at Togetherall is to see how we can do that in a smart way in the interest of all of the stakeholders of the business.
One of the things that I think is, a mentor of mine a long time ago asked me, are you prepared to actually make a hiring or firing decision with a key leader based on whether they did or didn't deliver a promise, or in this context, the purpose or the sort of normative goal of the business? And I think it's interesting because I think a lot of times people in boards, I sit on a number of boards, where you have the whole conversation and you talk about all the goals that were or were not met. But at the end of the day, the way it used to be was that conversation sort of started and stopped in that meeting. And then the next day, everything was sort of back to business as usual. And whichever leaders did or didn't deliver in that team, it was highly likely that they were all still going to work there. What you're beginning to see now, I mean, I've seen two articles in the Financial Times in the last 2 days about CEOs actually being replaced relating to lack of delivery against ESG objectives. And that's happening in the energy space, that's happening in the financial services space. And I just wanted to bring it back to you guys and ask whether whether you think that we are ready for that as a society, to actually have that bar be the place where people come and go as executives. Thoughts on that, experiences you've had, etc. Amit?
Sorry, I muted myself. I think look, what we want to do is build out as much renewable generation and battery storage as fast as possible. And obviously, if that's not working and we're not delivering on that, then we'll have to, at some point we would make some changes around that, because it's sort of so baked into what we're doing here. I guess I think the other point that I think is almost interesting to think about, and real accountability for ESG goals. If you have something that's like an external goal, so for example, things like the reporting on gender pay gap, actually then does make a difference, because it's constantly part of the hiring process, part of the hiring thoughts, and and because it's externally reported on and you have an obligation to do it, it's compulsory. It's a compliance thing to report on it. It's not voluntary, and it starts feeding into genuine decisions and becomes part of, you imagine then if you have to report on gender pay gap and the people department, or you end up hiring 100% male in a year and the gender pay gap gets hugely skewed, and you have to and you report on it and it looks bad, and someone's going to be responsible for that. Likewise, some of the reporting that's going to happen on emissions as well, your scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, and people set out targets for net zero, and if they start not achieving, so I think that stuff's happening. But again, these I think something like B Corp's an interesting being a B Corp is an interesting voluntary thing, because you sign up to it and it's a very, it's a really,
it's demanding.
It's a demanding process, and it gets harder as you grow. So the bigger a company gets, or my experience of it anyway, was the bigger a company gets, just because of the competing priorities, it gets harder to meet that, and more of a challenge. But that's a really good guardrail. And again, if you've made the commitment you're going to be a B Corp, that's a big thing that your customers, your team buy into. And if you miss becoming that, there's a lot of pressure on a lot of people around that. So I think these quite, external metrics, ideally where you're buying into something that other companies are doing as well, or having to do something other companies are doing as well, does lead to that. So the direction of travel is clear on those things. And, arguably without, companies don't want to have too much, red tape or bureaucracy to do. But some of these things, I think they really have a big impact when they become mandated, and hopefully there's going to be more of them.
I would agree with you. Just on the gender pay gap point, which I'm glad you raised, we in the boards that I sit on, at first there was quite a bit of cynicism around it, in terms of this is like bureaucratic and it takes a lot of resources to do. 2 to 3 years in, it has changed the dialogue, and it's changed the shape of the leadership team, and it's brought more pay equity than I would have thought. And also the peer group comparison makes a difference too. Other thoughts, Liam and Michelle, before we wrap?
Just very briefly, I think that on the question of sort of executive responsibility and so on, one of the things that I'm noticing in the companies that I'm involved in is there does seem to be a new generation of senior executives coming through, people in their sort of who've had a successful career elsewhere, bringing a level of sort of commercial nous and leadership power, but wanting to find leadership roles that have a very clear mission and purpose at the heart of them. We've certainly found that with Togetherall and other businesses that we invest in through IV UK. There are some counter signals. I mean, Emmanuel Faber at Danone got it in the neck earlier this year, didn't he? When the investor said, "Well, that's all very well, monsieur, but look at last quarter's results. You're out." I hope that's I can't see that being the future. I think the future will be very talented leaders bringing the ability to hold on to all of those different bottom lines in a purpose-driven business.
And less punitive, more supportive as people come up through their career, where they have experiences that actually teach them to be this kind of leader.
Very much so.
I think we're at time right now, and this has been a super good conversation. I really appreciate everyone's contributions. I'm going to wrap it. I thank you for all of your thoughts and the broad range of experiences and inputs you've shared today. I'm going to hand it back to Tom.